Welcome to our Stellar Blade review, one of the most anticipated games of 2024. Does this action-adventure game change the genre? Does it transcend? Or does it fall flat on its medium ass? We're going to talk about all of it right about now. So Stellar Blade comes to the table with a lot of expectations. We have a Sony game that is kind of in that middle of the space where the folks are still waiting for more games to come out from the Sony side, while also getting a ton of marketing towards this game that had a really strong demo that got a lot of folks excited, me included. Having checked out the demo, it felt really good to get on the sticks and play it. Combos felt pretty intuitive, and all of those things within that scope felt really good. So it landed in a spot where I was like, all right, cool, this is going to be really fun to play on the retail side once we get review code to check it out. And I wasn't disappointed in that respect at all. I think Stellar Blade, after my 35 hours of playtime in there, I finished it to completion, got to the main ending, and rolled credits on it, and overall had a pretty decent time with it. I think there are some glaring issues along the narrative side of this, and I think where it really shines is in the combat space. The combat space is really good. Linking combos, adding new moves to your moveset, getting a chance to play around with some of the enemies and learning their patterns, and all of those pieces feels really good from a combat perspective. But this game doesn't feel like it's doing anything specifically different or specifically new, or really changing anything in the space that we haven't already seen before. There's a lot of layers of this game that, although this is one of the prettiest games that we've seen on PlayStation 5 for a while, I think what we wind up getting in all of that is a really pretty game with a lot of generic pieces that surround it. When I talk about generic parts of the game, I talk about a lot of it in terms of the scope of it, right? The game itself is massive. There are some beautiful, fantastic looking open world scenes where you move into all of these larger combat areas and you're running around and you're finding enemies to fight. But even the enemies feel kind of rote. They don't feel very interesting in a lot of different ways. They have some interesting tactics in the way that they fight, but design wise, you can see what they were trying to do, which was, using the Earth as the main character for the space, and seeing how, reimagined animals would be and reimagined kind of beings would be in a space that is capturing what would happen if Earth had evolved past, the worlds that we know. Some of that stuff has already been done in a lot of other games before, and it didn't feel like this game was really treading any new ground in any significant ways. And even that generic feeling went back to the protagonist. Eve, as a super badass combat warrior from the 7th Airborne colony, or 7th Airborne group, should feel really cool, should feel like there's a lot to her as a character. But as a character, Eve is really boring.
Eve, what are you going to do after you defeat the Alpha Natiba?
All airborne squad members exist for one sole purpose. All we must do is complete the mission.
You mean the extinction of all Natibas, right? To think that the point of your existence is to snuff out another species. No fun in that.
Eve is probably one of the more boring protagonists we've seen in a space in a long time. I don't know if that's because of the way that, the team was thinking about her when they first crafted her as a character, or if that was limitations that wind up happening, and maybe there's some localization issues there, some translation issues, and the ways that character comes across in the scenes where she's not just fighting stuff. But overall, Eve as a character, most of the things that people know are about her butt, and nobody cared about her as a character until they started to really see the rest of this game kind of come to fruition. And now getting a chance to be her for so many hours, there's really nothing there. It really does feel like this character is just there to be looked at, with some side story stuff that kind of plays in front of the camera. The narrative of this game is all over the place. it was a game. It was a part of the process of reviewing it that was the thing I was most looking forward to. I was like, this is going to be really great to be able to see how this character grows in this arc that they've set up, which makes for a really good story. You have the classic, what happens when the Earth gets destroyed. You have what happens when the aliens come over and invade and change up the way the world works. It has the pinnings and the foundations for what any good story could potentially be, and Shift Up didn't really nail it at all with any of this stuff. I think the characters felt rushed. I felt like the characters weren't given enough actual story in the game. A lot of the storytelling is done through these notes and these memos that you wind up seeing across the world. They do this thing that I really don't like in games where they drop you into a space and expect you to care about a character without ever really introducing you to that character, to their world, or even their motivations. Their motivations in this game, yes, you're there to kind of kill the Natiba, but the other layers of that stuff just feel super flat. It doesn't really land anywhere that makes you care about any of the characters that are involved. The main one, the side ones, the side quests, which are all pretty much fetch quests, don't do anything besides really give you some materials to be able to use for growing your character or making Eve a little bit stronger. And overall, the story, which could have been a banger, really was really dull. It was really dull and boring. It didn't feel smart. It didn't feel interesting. It didn't really tie into the way that the fights worked in any real ways. So you wind up going from these really poignant, potentially poignant moments to going into fighting these things without any motivation and any real why for any of that stuff. There are small pieces in the story that touch on it, but overall, it feels really happenstance and it doesn't really feel cohesive. It feels very disjointed in the way that the narrative for this game works. I do feel like one of the best parts of this game, though, if you want to talk about the highlights of this game is one of the prettiest games that we've seen on the console so far. I think Shift Up has nailed all of the environments. I feel like anytime you would go to a new space, you would see small things here and there that you would be like, oh, wow, that looks really gorgeous. They're really using the technology here in a really smart way. But that didn't really translate fully into everything, right? Like some of the art was really, really great in some spaces. A lot of the external stuff was good. But even side characters were kind of messy and didn't really look that great and didn't feel that awesome in terms of the visuals there. So it was a little bit uneven in terms of visuals across the board, but the character model looks fantastic. I think, you know, the conversation around the glossiness of the boobies and the butt is a part of that conversation. There are moments in the game where if you took a screenshot of it, you would say, wow, this looks really premium and awesome. And then some other times you're like, this could totally be a budget title that would cost you $40 and you would be able to go cop it wherever you want. So that unevenness was a little bit weird in that respect, but they did really do a really great job in terms of environment, in terms of, you know, the visual effects on some of the fights and some of the actions that you do really did jump off the screen. Animations in this game are stunning. They did a really great job on the animations in this game in a real way. And it felt like all of that tied into combat in a really smart way, because I think combat in this game is where this game fully shines. Anytime you get into a fight, you feel like a badass. There are times when you have other options of like sneaking up on a character and backstabbing them, you know, stabbing them in the butt. You had some other places where you want to go into a fight and kind of rush in and get you know, the enemy caught off guard and on surprise before you can start to take them down. Lots of different options in the ways that you can take on a fight, which I thought was really, really good. I thought that came across extremely well in terms of what Stellar Blade was bringing to the table. It didn't feel exactly like a Souls-like in the ways that we usually think. You know, there was a little bit of, it felt like input lag in the space. I have an expectation to kind of like continue to do a combo and feel like there's some speed in there. And it always felt like it didn't tell you that you had to be measured or timed in the ways you had to do it. So it wind up not giving you a really good space to understand just how much and exactly how you should kind of engage with the combo system. Even though the combo systems were really good and were really flashy, there was a little bit of a space there that felt a little bit off. Also, platforming in this game just felt bad. The jumping in this game can be can be totally off. There's a moment in which you get a double jump later on, and then the game feels a little bit better. But even then, the way that you engage with the platforming sections within this game, or moments where you have to jump from one thing to another to discover a thing, those always felt a little bit off. And it wasn't just because of like input error from me, because I play these games all the time, but it felt like there was a moment in between a jump that felt like where you were supposed to land didn't always feel consistent, and that felt a little bit frustrating in the ways that you would go through some of the engagements in this game. So it winds up being, B plus in terms of combat and where it felt. There were some things in the game that, in terms of that combat, that didn't feel always on point, and that was a little bit of a deterrent. And it also kind of gave it that budget feel. But overall, some of the fights that you have in this game in terms of the boss battles is where it shines. The boss battles and some of the larger Natiba that you fight, those are the most fun that you're going to have in this game. The kind of in-between fights when you're in the open world, those are okay, but the boss fights in this game are what makes this game kind of special. It does land in those ways really, really smartly. So I would say if there's one thing that you should be looking forward to, getting into those big-ass boss fights are going to be a lot of fun. So make sure you're taking your time with those and really paying attention to the landscape. So overall, Stellar Blade is a pretty decent game. I think, there's a lot of conversation around the internet layer and the social media layer of, does this game crap on the woke folks? Is this the epitome of what, Western beauty standards and Eastern beauty standards are supposed to be? And all of those conversations therein. At the end of the day, it is an interesting conversation to dig into if you are paying attention to those. I don't think that this game is as good as a lot of those folks have wanted it to be. I'm sure that a lot of those folks will find and kind of, give it its own kind of thrust to be able to get it to where they want it to be in the prominent space that it is. But this game is an okay game. It's not bad. It just didn't really hit the level of expectation that I had for it. I went into that demo, came out of that demo thinking this game was probably about a 7. It probably still is around a 7 if you were doing it in our booty scale. It's probably about 3 butts in terms of where it lands. But I think overall, it's a fun game that you can spend some time with, go around in the world and kind of enjoy what you're seeing. If you can turn your brain off and not think a lot about the story bits, then you'll have a lot more fun. Because once you start to dig into the narrative and the story, it really kind of falls apart pretty quickly. But from a adventure game, if you're looking for something where you want to feel like a badass, Eve is totally a badass. I had a moment towards the end of the game that I won't spoil that I thought was really, really fun and interesting and cool, that I think will get people excited for what potentially this game is going to be in the future. And I also think that this is a game where, Shift Up has really landed in a space where I'm hoping their next game feels a little bit more polished. I feel like that game will be the game that I think a lot of people will really come to because they've got a really good foundation for what they've brought to the table. But for me, it just didn't really feel as big and as kind of grandiose as the marketing is getting pushed for it and for what I got a chance to play. There is definitely a gap between those two things in a real way that I was hoping would be closer, but wind up not really hitting the mark. So I would say definitely check out Stellar Blade. Stellar Blade is a fun game. Make sure you have a lot of time on your hands because it took me about 35 hours to complete, and that was when I kind of abandoned some of the side missions because they got boring and they felt more like a burden than anything else. But if you are a completionist, I can totally see you spending like 50 hours or so in this game and going for all of the costumes, which were really up and down. I think some of them were really good and some of them weren't really great. It was interesting to see, how the model also changed when you put on certain costumes and things like that. There are little pieces of the world that I think are fun and interesting. And I think that some of the systems in the game are okay. They just don't really kind of like do anything different than any other game hasn't done in the past 10 years, which for the way that Sony has been talking about this game, you would have hoped that it would have been. It also does bring up a really good conversation at some point about how does this game fit into the overall Sony portfolio. And I think in a space where Sony is still trying to put out some games and trying to figure out when those games are going to drop, this being the game that drops and it potentially not being 8 or a 9 or a 10, I wonder where that fits everything in kind of the ecosystem of where this game lands overall in the way that people think about it. I don't think this game is memorable. This game is not going to be a game that you're going to want to go back to after you finished it. I don't think people were going to be talking about this game after they've been done with it. And it kind of falls in this middling space where there was a lot of potential for what this game could be, but a lackluster story, some interesting issues in the way that they deal with narrative, and kind of the overarching conversation has maybe pulled it down a couple of points for a lot of people. So I would say, go and enjoy it. Go have fun with it. Go check it out. Let me know what you think about my review, what you thought about my thoughts about the game in the comments below. And we'll have more conversations about Stellar Blade and all the other goodness once the embargo drops, which is today, and everybody else has their chance to kind of dig through it. So massive love to all of you for watching and hanging out. Thank you so much for listening to the show, and thank you so much for watching the review. We'll talk to you soon. Much love to you all. Peace.